TV.
My name's Cllr Paul Golding. We're here in the GLA building, City Hall in central London. I'm joined by Assembly Member Richard Barnbrook. Now, it was just over a year ago that Richard was elected to the Greater London Assembly, an enormous, significant BNP breakthrough. That was just over a year ago. He's now took some time out from his busy schedule to join with us and spend some time explaining what's actually happened over the last year. Richard, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
What sort of reception have you been receiving from the other Assembly members, from Boris Johnson, from the staff, everyone in the building?
For most part, really from day one, regardless of what the media were alluding to prior to the elections I was elected to. And you have to remember, this is just over 200,000 people voted me in here, expecting me to do work on their behalf. So the reception that came in here, pretty much from the first day, was fine. The security were fine, most of the officers, in fact all the officers I spoke to were fine. And even to be quite honest about it, I would say that 4, possibly 5 of the GLA members are quite courteous, in fact very courteous when they're off of camera, in a sense, when their colleagues aren't standing over their shoulders. So when I go into the commerce question time, 3 or 4 of the Conservatives will say good morning, good afternoon, whatever else may be. And the other aspect is that for most of the members that are on the panels that I'm on, such as auditing, the health and sub-budget committee, when we go into questions, they give me a free range. And on the health issue, with James Cleverly, the Conservative, I pretty much run the show when it comes to asking really serious questions. So again, generally it's been pretty good, in fact very good in many respects.
Yeah, well, I can say from my own personal experience, sitting on Sevenoaks Council, you seem to get a completely different attitude coming from the other councillors on Sevenoaks Council when the media's present or when their political party bosses are present, but quite when you're face to face with them after meetings, and so they're all shaking your hand and talking to you normally. It's
the same. I think at the end of the day, they know a job's got to be done. They actually recognise, whether they like it or not, that I was duly elected, and they also realise, if the truth be known, and I think they'd probably say it themselves when they go to bed with a cup of Horlicks or a cup of tea, that really this guy is putting forward the questions that London needs to have answered. And on those grounds, I think they quietly respect what I say.
Absolutely. Well, can you give us a rough outline of what you think is your greatest achievement in your first year as an Assembly member?
Well, I think the one particular one, there's 2, but one that comes right to mind, and I think this is when I was talking face to face in the plenary meeting with the then head of Metropolitan Police, Sir Paul Stevens, when I actually put it to him and to Boris Johnson why it was that the Met Police will not accept membership or will not accept people that are members of the British National Party. Now my belief really is that Sir Stevens wanted to answer this in a real direct way, and between Boris Johnson and then the chair of the GLA simply blanketed it. No, you don't have to answer that. No, you don't have to answer that. Where I think Sir Stevens did want to sort of make a statement towards it, and especially when I mentioned the fact that the Met Police will have all sorts of walks of life, and in some people we don't know if they belong to one terrorist group or another terrorist group. So he'll let those into the Met, but he won't let honest, abiding family members of the British National Party, a legitimate party, into the Met Police.
Yeah, absolutely outrageous. Now, you've been locking horns with Mayor of London Boris Johnson on a regular basis. Can you give us a sort of brief idea of the way he reacts to your direct, frank questioning?
Well, in the early stages, he would try to answer me, and in 1 or 2 occasions he actually said, yes, I agree. And Mr. Barnbrook, I agree with you. He always called me Barnbrook rather than Richard, but hey, what's a name amongst good friends like Mayor Boris. But he actually said, well, I agree with you. You know, this TV and video games should be really looked into seriously. So that was the one time he actually directly agreed with me. The other times he tends to either try to answer me, as I mentioned in the earlier days, or he sort of answers me through the chair, Jeanette Arnold as it was then, now some guy from the Greens whose name is irrelevant. Or in many situations, especially quite recently, on hard crimes such as knife crime, and also the attributing certain sort of crimes such as knife and gun to a minority group of our community in London, he simply fumbles and can't answer it. And there's one occasion, I think, when I was ripping into Boris Johnson in the most polite way possible, by saying to him, well, have the good decency to look at me when I'm talking to you, that Ken Livingstone sat behind him and facing me was giggling away as I just ripped into Boris Johnson, simply for the fact that he didn't have the decency to answer me, but more likely he could not answer such sensitive questions that London desperately need answering. They're not that overly interested about the bendy bus or which way one route goes or another route goes. As long as people can get to, from work or to shops and back home again, they're more interested in what really affects their lives, and that's the security of their being and their goodwill.
Absolutely. So you're the only British National Party member on the GLA. You have been leading the fight on behalf of the people of London against political correctness.
Yes.
Within the Greater London Assembly. Can you give us some examples of the...
well, yes, I'd like to go back also to the comment, what's been one of my greatest successes, and there's one of them I said, there's two, which again leads into the aspect of political correctness. And one is the St George's Day. We, the party, have pushed for this in London for the last 3, 4, 5 years, and Boris gave in on that. The other aspect, which I'd like to speak a bit later about, is the helping the elderly, how they're suffering. And is that political correctness? No, but it's a sort of social demon that marks elderly people out and not getting what they truly deserve. But the real political correctness and the success there has been the questioning of the Notting Hill Carnival and the cost of £6 million to tidy up the mess.
On an annual basis.
On an annual basis. And the policing level. Again, this is political correctness gone mad in the sense that we're spending money of a large amount on a minority of people over that of the majority of people. There's other aspects where we fought against Rise, which is this sort of multicultural music thing, festival. And we managed to pull back. I think it was around about, it worked out to be £5,000. No, it was £50,000 for the political aspect of Rise. Now, Boris Johnson knew that he had to cancel that on the grounds that no group that asks for grant from the GLA can outly attack elected members of the GLA.
Yeah.
So as elected member, Rise and its political aspect were attacking the BNP and myself, and that can't be done. Another aspect was worked out to be £5,000 a month going to the National Assembly against racism. And again, their setup is to directly attack us. And Boris knew if he continued giving money towards them, I would pull him up to the Standards Board. If that didn't work, towards the European Court of Human Rights on the constitution level of the GLA. Again, you cannot give finances out to groups that directly attack the members duly elected.
Now, see, if you wouldn't have been elected and you wasn't here, you couldn't carry out this campaign against politically correct aspects of what goes on here. All of the funding for these fringe left-wing groups and so-called anti-racist
and they would have got away with it.
It would have just carried on as before.
Exactly.
And there'd be no extra funding for St George's Day parades or anything at all like that. So one other thing you've become pretty famous for in your work over the last year on the GLA is your tough stance on knife crime.
It is. Boris Johnson, bless his soul, he has tried with the blunt one and blunt two, but the whole project's blunt before it even starts. It's not doing enough. I've said to him, look, if need be, you must go to the Home Secretary and to the Prime Minister and say, look, do something about knife crime. If it means giving out a mandatory sentence of 3 years, and to be honest, I don't care how old they are. If they're taking the knife, I would sooner see them locked away in a custodial sentence than on a slab or in a body bag. It shouldn't happen. And I mentioned again to Boris, create more prisons. Oh, I'd like to, but I haven't got the power. Well, look, if you've got the power to intervene on certain things like the Olympic Games or the FA, or even which we may discuss later, Buckingham Palace, why can't he intervene on something such as knife crime? And when you find last year alone, between I think it was 35 to 40 young youths between the age of 13 and 16 died at the knife. That is not acceptable.
So in the GLA chamber, when the debates were carrying on, they was talking about bus routes. They was talking about this non-issue and another non-issue, and you was there, pretty much the only assembly member who wanted to debate the real things, such as knife crime. Yeah.
Well, again, this is the situation. They come up with these little starter menu questions, and we put the meat and 2 veg on the table. We put questions forward that they are too embarrassed because their paymasters or their controllers of Labour, Lib and Green and Conservative can't answer. And another thing about the knife aspect is that the petition's gone forward now. and that is raised around about 45,000 signatures just in London alone. It's taken its own cause. This was not a political agenda. It is simply an agenda for all cross-party aspects